This is New Day with Allison Camerata and John Berman.
The least exciting college football championship on record yields to the most interesting news day.
I don't even know what that means. I look forward to hearing what you're about to say.
Stay tuned. Welcome to our viewers in the United States and all around the world. This is New Day. It's Tuesday, January 8th, 6 o'clock here in New York. And this morning, the big question is 7 minutes of what? Tonight, the president will deliver his first Oval Office address. We're told it will be about 7 minutes long. But 7 minutes of what exactly? 7 minutes to convince the American people that the government shutdown, now on its 18th day, is worth it. 7 minutes to justify the shutdown that he promised, the president promised to own and pledged to continue unless he got funding for a border wall that is now a steel barrier that Mexico will still not pay for. Sources say the president's aides have told him his message is not resonating, so he will try to use those 7 minutes to fix that, to argue there is a crisis at the U.S.-Mexico border. But this morning, critics are asking how much of these 7 minutes will be based on fact, because the last 72 hours, his case has been riddled with false claims.
So, how can the American public trust what the president says tonight when the administration has repeatedly lied about the numbers and the situation at the border? Furthermore, President Trump just claimed that some of his predecessors confided in him that they should have built the wall long ago. Every living president says that's not true. They did not talk to President Trump. Congress is back today, but no breakthrough yet to reopen the government. The effects of the second longest government shutdown in American history are starting to be felt. We are 3 days away from nearly 1 million federal workers not getting their first full paycheck. TSA officials are concerned about how to keep airport security agents on the job without pay. And millions of low-income Americans could lose food assistance if the shutdown drags on. So we have so much to discuss this morning. Joining us now, former Clinton White House Press Secretary Joe Lockhart, Washington Bureau Chief for the Daily Beast Jackie Kucinich, and CNN political analyst David Gregory. Great to see all of you. Joe, the problem is that they have repeatedly used erroneous numbers about the situation at the border. I mean, just for one example, Secretary of Department of Homeland Security, Kirstjen Nielsen, in June of this past year said, I will quote her tweet, "We do not have a policy of separating families at the border, period." On that day, 2,000 children had already been separated from their parents. There were more to come. We can't trust them. They've proven it time and again. So tonight, these 7 or 8 minutes from the president, it's really hard to know what the point will be and what we should take away from it.
Yeah, and the justification for a national emergency has been built largely on the fact that terrorists have been pouring over the border, the southern border. And I think we found out last night that the number isn't 4,000, that there was as few as 6 people who were stopped. And we don't even know if they're terrorists. They just may have the same name as a terrorist. I mean, it really is nonsense. So you have a national emergency based on fiction. And that's the problem for putting this on the air. There are real issues about, and I think the networks, I hope, struggled yesterday with the decision to put this on, because he consistently hasn't told the truth. And, someone's got to fact check that. If I were a network executive, which I'm not, I wouldn't put this on live. I would let him give the address and I'd look at it.
And now for a reality check, because there's just no other way to say it. The president and administration officials are pushing lies.
What's true, what's not, because we shouldn't be using our public airwaves for someone to spew more of these lies. You have a president who's trying to create hysteria for his own political purposes, not to protect the American people.
To be clear, there's no precedent for that. There's no precedent for the networks getting the presidential text beforehand and then deciding whether it's true or not. And this is the first request from this president to address the nation from the Oval Office. Thus, it has a certain weight and importance here. Ted Koppel, former anchor of Nightline, said, look, David Gregory, we've got to give the president the benefit of the doubt. He wants this airtime. If he blows it this time, if it's 7 or 8 minutes of lies this time, then the next time the networks shouldn't give it. But he is the president.
Right, and he hasn't asked before. There have been debates about how presidents have used national airtime in the past. During the Iraq War, I remember notably a lot of debates around updates on the war's progress and actions being taken in Iraq. So that'll continue. But I do think Joe's right. I think there's an opportunity and a responsibility, and I know CNN will do it, to really scrutinize what the president says in real time, as well as provide Democrats an opportunity to respond so that there can be some debate in prime time that's in the national interest about the government shutdown and about whether there is any kind of emergency at the border, which has been a case thus far made with so many falsehoods that are provably false, a situation that has not dramatically changed and that the president has not dealt with. When he had an opportunity to get 5 times as much funding from the Democrats as he's demanding now to have a comprehensive solution. So those are the holes that have to be exposed about the president's approach here. At the same time, he's doing what I think most presidents would do, try to command as much attention to control the narrative in this government shutdown, to force the solution his way.
You know what's so interesting, Jackie, is the public support for this.
Right.
So it started at, I think, 58%. This was back in 2016, September 2016. 58% of people opposed the border wall. Now, after all of the talk, after everything that President Trump and Sarah Sanders and Kirstjen Nielsen and everybody has tried to say about this crisis, 57%. So statistically equal, still oppose the border wall.
Right. And, while the president, some of the folks that are close to the president are concerned that his message isn't breaking through, it might be that the public just doesn't agree with him. You could say that the midterm elections was a rejection of some of the tactics that the administration used during the 2018 election, having to do with immigration, the caravan, the immigration hellscape that they were painting. People didn't buy it. So perhaps it's the message and the messenger, not how it's being said. In order to fact check this in live time, we might be seeing a situation where it's basically closed captioned because of this president's notorious infrequent relationship with the truth.
You want to pre-fact check some of the things that may come up tonight? Number one, the idea that there's a crisis on the border. I happen to have a chart here.
Oh, your favorite chart.
Which shows
I gave you this for
illegal border crossings. If you look down at the bottom there, which is covered by our banner, 2018, there were 396,000 illegal border crossings. You can see it's at a more or less historic low.
But let me just push back on that for a second, John, because I think that when you have all of these unaccompanied minors who are in these holding facilities, sleeping on boards or slats or whatever, clearly the U.S. government at the moment does seem overwhelmed. 2 kids have died.
It's an apples and oranges argument. It's an apples and oranges argument. And when you're talking about a border wall, asylum seekers with children don't jump over a wall or run across a border. They present themselves at ports of entry.
Legally.
So what I'm saying, if the president is saying there's a national security reason to build a wall because people are flooding over the border, this chart tells you that the numbers of people coming are near or at an historic low.
Fantastic. And what I'm saying is that clearly there are issues, and I think Democrats are at risk of acting when they say a wall is immoral, and let's leave it at that. I think they are at risk of sounding too soft on there is something going wrong at the border, and there needs to be a larger, comprehensive conversation about what to fix it, not just as though a wall is going to fix it.
Well, I'll come back to the facts then in a second. But Joe, just to answer that point, does a wall stop asylum seekers with children?
No, it's not. And the Family Separation Policy instituted, as much as Donald Trump says it's the same as Obama's, it's not.
Of course not.
It's not. I'll say it
3,000
again.
kids were separated from their parents, and some may never be reunited.
So if there is a humanitarian crisis here, he created it. He can fix it. It is absolute fiction that there's a national emergency here. We have national emergencies. Climate change is a national emergency. Gun violence is a national emergency. This is not. This is politics. And tonight we're one of 2 things is going to happen. We're going to find out that Donald Trump is even more cynical than we ever knew, and that he used yesterday's briefing with the vice president to build this up so he could get his 7 minutes, and we'll just get moralized. Or we're going to have a constitutional crisis where he, for no reason at all, declares a national emergency and starts violating U.S. law or going against.
It'll be challenged in court, and the courts will decide.
Yes.
There's a case that can be made. There's a national emergency. My point, though, is that if he's going to make the case that you need a wall because people are flooding over the border, again, the facts here show that they are not flooding by any means compared to
and not only that, the argument is that there is a flood of migrants who are coming, illegal immigrants who are coming, who are committing crimes.
Or terrorists.
Or I was going to get to terrorists, or violent crimes, or that they're terrorists. Let's remember our short-term history. Back in 2007, when President Bush tried again to get comprehensive immigration reform, conservative populists, Fox News hosts, helped to tank it with this same specious argument that terrorists were going to come through the southern border. Hasn't happened. That was 2007. And now they're using it again when the facts tell us that most people who might be terrorists come through airports and not the southern border. It's really, it's worse than cynicism that people will try to force people to go along with this argument based on fear and based on a problem that they say is a crisis. There's no question there are real problems, that illegal crossings have spiked. There is the family separation issue, which they created, but they've had an opportunity to fix this. They've also had an opportunity to get more money from Democrats than they're even asking for now, and the president said no. So ask him, why did he say no when he had a chance to solve this?
Airports, by the way, that are currently dealing with TSA agents who aren't getting paid.
Bingo.
Who are calling out sick.
Bingo. That actually this whole stalemate over the border wall, the impasse over the border wall, is actually making the country less safe because there are fewer TSA agents on the job because they're not being paid.
Right, exactly. So it is cutting off his nose to spite its face. It's also causing immigration courts to slow and asylum claims to be processed slower. So things that the president has said he wants to do in terms of speeding that up, it's not happening. And it's because of this government shutdown.
I will also note that if you're talking about people on the terrorist watch list, which is either 6 or 9 or 12, depending on whose count, it's still fewer on the southern border than it is on the Canadian border. So if that's your justification to build a wall, we should be building one, laced with bacon and hockey games in the north, not down south. Let me also bring up another lie that the president told, because it is fascinating and it illustrates where we are on this argument. The president made the case that his predecessors have told him they wished they had built a wall. Let's listen to that.
This should have been done by all of the presidents that preceded me, and they all know it. Some of them have told me that we should have done it.
Some of them have told me that we should have done it. Well, representatives for each and every president and President Carter himself, they have put out statements now that says, This is a clarification from President Jimmy Carter. I have not discussed the border wall with President Trump and do not support him on this issue. David Gregory, have you ever heard a living president invent conversations with former presidents to make a case?
Yeah, no, and I think it's, this is another sad chapter, kind of breaking up what is special about the President's Club. To make a specious political argument. The president is really in a very weakened place. He did campaign on the idea of a border wall, something that he wanted. There were very few backers for why it made a lot of sense substantively, but symbolically, it certainly resonated with the core group of his supporters. And again, I'll say it, he had an opportunity to get some of that funding, and he may yet still get it if he can put it outside the parameters of the shutdown fight. But this is where he has been persuaded he wants it, that it'll do the most good for him. He's got to be questioning how long he can go on with the kind of pain that a government shutdown is causing to get any funding at all for this.
All right.
I think it may be a little bit like President Nixon, who was talking to the portraits. Those are ex-presidents, and maybe they're talking back to him.
Well, those conversations happened. At least President Nixon said something to the portraits. In this case, President Trump there was never a conversation at all.
That would have been better.
Yes.
Okay, Joe. All right, thank you very much.
All right, as the shutdown continues, hundreds of thousands of Americans, they are feeling the pinch. There is serious impact on some 800,000 people who will miss their first paycheck this week, and millions of Americans could soon lose food assistance. What is going to change the situation? What will stop this? That's next. Happening now, airports across the nation feeling the impact of the government shutdown. Sources tell CNN that senior TSA leaders held an urgent call to determine how to keep security screeners at their posts. CNN's Renee Marsh live at Reagan National Airport with the very latest. Renee, what have you heard?
Well, John, according to two sources, one who was on the call, the TSA will now start tracking these TSA employees' sick out calls nationwide. The agency also discussed incentives to essentially entice workers to show up to work. And the source on the call also said that the head of the TSA, David Pekoski, vowed that the level of security would not change and that he wants to be transparent with the American public about the sick calls and how it may impact their travel so that they know how much time that they would need to get through the security checkpoint. But this call is happening and these topics are being discussed. They really are an indication of the fact that the sick calls really have the attention of the highest level of the TSA. That's despite public rebuttals and public statements from both DHS and TSA that this isn't really a significant issue. Of course, this call comes after CNN broke the story on Friday that the number of sick calls among TSA employees continues to tick up under this government shutdown. And it also comes after the chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee sent a letter to the agency just yesterday asking for data on how many TSA employees have called out sick, as well as what is the agency's plan if they are severely short-staffed. How will they manage to maintain security at the nation's airports? Back to you guys.
Renee, thank you very much. Let's talk about the real-life effects of the shutdown with David Gregory, Jackie Kucinich, and CNN senior political analyst John Avlon. John, this makes my head explode. The fictional national security crisis at the southern border is now possibly creating a real security crisis at the airports because of the government shutdown, because of the impasse at the southern border. Really, where the most terrorists come through, airports, we may be understaffed.
That's exactly right. Welcome to Bizarro World, people. Look, Homeland Security is disproportionately affected by the shutdown, around 20% of those employees, TSA being the prime example. And as you know, as you just said, the vast majority of folks on the terror watch list who try to get into the country are through airports. So this is all self-perpetuating. And it's the problem of having a non-reality-based argument being advanced by the president. You know, DHS and the other agencies scramble to deal with the implications. They scramble to backfill the lies. And what you've got is a real problem being developed by posturing by the president.
And whether or not you think there's a crisis at the border, there is now a crisis at the kitchen table for some 800,000 people and families. 800,000 people who this week will not get a paycheck. Let's put the calendar up here so people know the dates here. January 11th, the first paychecks will be missed. If you go down late January and February, tax refunds are due. We should note that now the White House is changing the rules, so those tax refunds will come. But February and March, food assistance programs will run out of funding. That's SNAP, food stamps. People won't get the food that they need to eat. This is affecting people and will very soon, real people in very real ways, David Gregory. And I get the sense, it's becoming clearer as the morning goes on, that the reason the president is giving this speech tonight is perhaps the White House is fearful that he is losing control of this argument as more and more people are beginning to feel the impacts.
I don't think there's any question about it. I mean, the one thing this president understands through his Twitter feed, through social media generally, is going right to the American people, at least to rally his base of support, has some impact. But he doesn't seem to be gaining any traction on the idea of a wall, whatever form it takes, because he's been talking the same way since the campaign in 2016. The most vulnerable, when you talk about food stamps in our country being affected by this, those employees like TSA employees who may at some point have to look for another job. because they can't afford to sit back and wait for this to get resolved. Farmers who are looking for credits from the federal government, from the Farm Bureau, who won't be able to get access to that money. This starts to accumulate and reverberate in ways that affect so many people. And the president said he would own it. He would pick up the mantle because he thinks it's worth it. And the gamble tonight is that he's somehow going to persuade Americans that the pain that they're feeling is worth it to solve a national emergency that is not a national emergency. That's the gamble politically.
So, Jackie, Republicans are starting to splinter away from being in lockstep with the president because, of course, they hear from their constituents. And their constituents tell them all of these real-life impacts. So here's how Politico phrased it this morning. Despite the White House PR blitz, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, Minority Whip Steve Scalise, and other senior Republicans believe that a significant bloc of House Republicans could vote with Democrats on the funding measures, according to GOP lawmakers and aides. A senior House GOP said McCarthy and his top lieutenants believe 15 to 25 Republicans will vote with Democrats this week, possibly even more. We had heard of, I guess, 3 who publicly came out and said, let's keep the government running while we negotiate all of this. But 15 to 25, that's significant.
It's significant if Mitch McConnell decides to bring these up on the Senate floor. And that, I mean, he's sort of been Donald take the wheel since this began. Now, when he's going to take that back is probably when he gets pressured from his own members. He's got these blue state Republicans, Cory Gardner, Susan Collins, Tom Tillis, Joni Ernst, who are hearing from their constituents, and perhaps there'll be a critical mass there. We don't know yet, but Congress could stop this. They could, and they've been happy to abdicate their responsibility up until this point. We'll see if that continues.
You know, it's interesting. Jackie brought up a point in the last segment, which I think is overlooked. The president ran a campaign on this recently and lost. He created this caravan notion, this idea that the nation was being invaded because he thought it would drive Republicans to electoral victory. It did not. They suffered historic losses inside the House of Representatives. This is not ancient history. This is 2 months ago, John.
Yeah, yes, but from the president's perspective, 2 months ago might as well be ancient history sometimes. Look, this is the problem with the president who practices instinctively the politics of division rather than addition. He's not in a position to, from giving an Oval Office address, to build a case for broader support. And you're seeing the political and practical implications of this because he hasn't been able to move the needle on this signature issue. It didn't work in the midterms. It inflames the base. And he gets a real rush out of that in rallies. But when it comes to actually moving the needle on a major issue, where you normally would have a president try to cobble together a broader coalition, and that's one of the lost opportunities of the president's perspective. If he wanted to play big ball, he would tonight say, look, I want to push for a comprehensive immigration plan. Put that out. And say, you know, let's get the government up and running again. Let's have 3 months. Let's get to the table. Everyone's going to give something, but it's going to include a wall. You know, however that's defined, border security. That's what a smart president would do to try to enlarge the conversation and put Democrats on the defense. But instead, he's obsessed with playing to his base, and that doesn't work when you're trying to pull together broader coalitions in the country.
And the problem is, David Gregory, is he might say that tonight, just as John laid it out. John was a former speechwriter, and just as he laid it out, the president might say that. But then what happens is, in negotiations, the president, waffles.
Right, because he essentially had that on the table. You know, the last deadline pressure where this was an issue was over the Dreamers. And they got close, and then the White House balked, including, as I've mentioned several times, additional funding for, a wall because of what they call chain migration or family migration. So that's where those talks broke down. It does seem so obvious to take this outside the context of the government shutdown and find some way to force Democrats to negotiate on something broader outside of that. But I think the president is playing from behind, saying, I will own this thing. I will not blame you. Now I'm blaming you, and it's a national emergency, and Democrats aren't coming to the table. But I agree with you. I think that has such limited returns. I think the people who are going to be swayed by that argument have already been swayed by that argument. And it is, it's a fraction. It's a much smaller fraction than he would want.
It's interesting, Jackie, because, again, this morning has been a moment of clarity. I think that if you listen to what the White House has been saying, they say crisis, 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 crisis. I think the way out for the president is to declare a national emergency, even if the courts will overturn it, because at least it ends the shutdown over the next few days, the shutdown which may be politically unpalatable and unsupportable for him to continue. He wants to take the fight elsewhere, even at the risk of losing it.
Well, right. And as we said earlier, it's going to be challenged in the courts, almost certainly. I think Jay Johnson, the former Department of Homeland Security Cabinet Secretary, said one of the risks that we have here is that people won't really trust the president when he says there's national emergencies in the future, when there is actually a national emergency. These are also powers that are mostly used, or that are meant to be used during wartime. And so will Congress go back and try to restrict this, and other presidents won't have it in the future? There are a lot of consequences that could reverberate out of this.
But that may be a fight he's willing to have in the future to kick this shutdown can down the road, because this is going to hurt, and soon.
Right.
Thank you all very much for all that perspective. Meanwhile, a lot's happening overseas. Turkey's president is slamming President Trump's national security advisor, John Bolton, over these new comments that he made about how long U.S. troops should stay.
New questions about U.S. policy in Syria. Turkey's president is now slamming President Trump's national security advisor, John Bolton, who is on a trip overseas. CNN's Nick Robertson is live with the breaking details. What's going on here, Nick?
Yeah, John Bolton is in Turkey today. He has met with Erdogan spokesman Kalin. The outcome of that meeting isn't clear. Kalin is expected to speak in a short while, but what is absolutely clear is that Turkey's president is incensed by what John Bolton said when he was in Israel in the past couple of days, that a U.S. withdrawal of troops from Syria would be contingent on Turkey protecting, taking care of the U.S. allies in Syria. Those allies, the YPG, a Kurdish militia that the U.S. has been supporting in its fight against ISIS. The problem for Turkey is it considers the YPG, those Kurdish fighters, to be part and parcel of the Kurdish parties that Turkey has been fighting with for decades. Therefore, they consider them terrorists. So what we've heard from President Erdogan today is he says what Bolton has said is a serious mistake, is not acceptable. President Erdogan says he made a deal with President Trump. He says Turkey keeps its deals, it keeps its word, it expects its allies to keep their word as well. So where this seems to be going at the moment seems to be an escalation of tensions between the United States and Turkey. President Erdogan clearly unhappy that he thinks he got a deal, the U.S. pulling its troops out of Syria. He said that his forces are ready to go in and retake those areas that Kurdish militia, the YPG, that the U.S. has been supporting, that they've been holding. We don't know which direction this is going in at the moment, but clearly John Bolton is right in the middle of it. John, Allison?
Nick, I think that is really significant that Erdogan says he had a deal with President Trump, because, President Trump has made it sound as though this was his own unilateral decision. He made this promise. The idea, there was always talk that they had a phone conversation, but the idea that Erdogan saw it as a deal with President Trump is not something that I think the American public necessarily saw it as until now.
No, this is very clearly Erdogan's understanding of the situation. He makes it very clear in what is said today. We keep our word. We expect our allies to keep their word. And indeed, he went further. He went beyond that to say, look, that was an agreement that I made with President Trump, and we still consider President Trump as the point of reference on this. So he's essentially saying not only is Bolton making a serious mistake, but that he is going to ignore whatever John Bolton said.
And that's the problem. The president's words and John Bolton's words right now are not at all in concert.
Nick, thank you very much. All right, so as more Democrats prepare to throw their hat in the 2020 ring, which demographic do they need the most? Harry Enton tells us next.
But first, the new CNN original series begins this Sunday at 9 p.m., American Style. He gives a front row seat to the history of America's changing style trends. Here's a look. We have major developments in the race for president, some big 2020 moves. The Wall Street Journal reports overnight that Beto O'Rourke is planning this solo road trip to meet voters outside of Texas. He's going alone with no staff, going to do a lot of social media. That'll be interesting to see. In the meantime, Senator Kamala Harris of California, she begins a book tour today in advance of a likely presidential announcement. What does this all mean? Joining us now to discuss, senior writer and analyst for CNN Politics, Harry Enton. There is something about Harry. Look, when you look at 2020 and look at who will be deciding the outcome of the Democratic primary, there's a fairly quick and easy answer.
It's women. And one of the things that I want to kind of point out is look at where the polls are right now. Men are in the top 4 positions in our latest CNN poll: Biden, Sanders, O'Rourke, and Booker. But yet in the power rankings that I do with Chris Eliza, we actually have Harris at 1, and then we have Warren at 5, and there are other women, Amy Klobuchar, Kirsten Gillibrand, who are also involved. And why is that? Why are we elevating women higher than they are in the polls right now? And I think that this is a key thing that we have to recognize, and that is women. Women voters make up a disproportionate percentage of the Democratic primary electorate. So they make up 58% of this versus in the 2018 general election, they made up just 52% of voters. So women vote in very, very large numbers in Democratic primaries.
But so why does that make Kamala Harris number 1 in your assessment?
So one of the things that I think is just so interesting is let's take a look at 2016, right? There was this very large gender gap that I don't think was really spoken about. Women voters went overwhelmingly for Hillary Clinton. She won them by 21 points in the median state. There were 27 states that had an entrance or exit poll. Clinton won women by 21 points. Among men, Bernie Sanders actually won by 1 point. So it's plausible that if women voters had decided to vote like men voters, Hillary Clinton would not have been the Democratic nominee.
If women vote for women, then the female candidates are at an advantage.
That's exactly right. And take a look at what happened in 2018, right? We just spoke about the gender gap in 2016. Look what happened in the 2018 congressional primaries. A record 182 Democratic women won their House primaries. Women, 53% of those who ran in Democratic House primaries won. Only 33% of men who ran in Democratic House primaries won. So we've basically seen in the last 2 cycles that women candidates have been dominating, that women seem to have voted for women. In fact, a CBS News poll that was taken in 2015 showed that the second highest reason that women gave, or voters who voted for Hillary Clinton gave in that primary for voting for her, was they said it was time for a woman president.
That's really interesting. But when will you see that reflected in public opinion polls? And why don't we see that?
I think part of the reason we don't see that is, if you look at this top Dem, slide, what you see is that the 2 top candidates here have very high name recognition. A lot of the women who are running are not that well known to the general electorate. Elizabeth Warren, perhaps a little bit more so, but people like Amy Klobuchar, Kamala Harris, they are just not well known at this time. And so we're trying to put in a little smarts into these rankings. And that's why you see right now that Harris has won and Warren has won.
And that's why, watch the book tour. I'm going to touch the wall.
Oh, my God. What is this? You can't. Whoa. I know. I'm just making it more green.
Starting today. Can I ask you, because we've been talking a lot about the shutdown and the wall, what do the numbers tell us?
Yeah. So if we were to take a look, I took a Harry's average of polls, and this is basically who Americans are blaming for the shutdown since it began. Trump overwhelmingly is winning that battle. More Americans are blaming Donald Trump.
Why does it get a tilde?
That's an about sign. So it's about 50%. It's one of those things where I'm rounding the numbers because I don't need, 49.6957423 on the screen.
Understood.
So 50% for Trump, 35% are blaming congressional Democrats, and 5% are blaming congressional Republicans. So if we were to sum that all up in a very simple thing, it's 55% are blaming Republicans and 35% are blaming Democrats for the shutdown right now. Trump has his work cut out for him tonight.
All right, I don't know if you were watching the show yesterday, but John went really negative on Bohemian Rhapsody, okay?
He did.
So I don't know what that says about the Golden Globes versus the Oscars, but you do.
I do. So I did in fact watch that. John got more upset about that than perhaps he will be if the New England Patriots lose this weekend. We'll see on that.
Because the New England Patriots are good. Bohemian Rhapsody isn't.
Oh, boy.
I like Queen, so I'm not going to say very much of anything, but I actually emailed my friend Walter Hickey, who has this nice website down here, and asked him, he's done all this stuff, and basically what we see is that the Golden Globes, if you win Best Drama, it's really not that predictive of whether or not you're going to win Best Picture. It's only 49% of the time, and even if you add in the comedy or musical? Bohemian Rhapsody is kind of in the middle there. Is it a drama? Is it a musical? What exactly is it? Even then, that's only 15%.
Yeah, I know
so it's less than 2/3 of the time that the Golden Globes Best Pictures, and you get 2 slices at that pie, actually predicts.
All right, so
Best
that should
Oscar.
really comfort you this morning.
I do. So it's not going to win the Best Picture award.
It doesn't sound like
Thank
it.
goodness. Thank you.
The Favorite should have won. I love that film.
There is
Oh, I
something
really wanna
about
see
you.
that.
There really is something about you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The comics ripping the federal government shutdown. Here are your late night laughs.